presentation for the Easton Early Elementary School, Massachusetts School Building Authority project update and timeline. That microphone into the middle of where you're sitting. They're not amplified, but they're just to record on video.
So good evening. Thank you for the opportunity for us to provide an update. I'm going to be as brief as possible just to kind of set the stage, and then I'm going to turn it over to our owner's project manager and our designers for this evening. So first I'll do introductions in terms of who's here tonight. So we have Robert Bell. Bob's, I think all of you have probably met these folks before, but just for the audience, Rob's from Perkins Easton, which is our designer, and then I have Walter Hartley. Walter's from PMA. There's our owner's project manager, and Van Collins in the audience, also from Perkins. And then I have Chrissy Pruitt's here in case there's any questions that come up around the educational program. So the first thing I'm going to do is just set the stage in terms of a rewind. I'd like to remind everybody that this process has been going on for quite some time. In fact, beginning in 2011, the district has submitted a statement of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Authority every single year for our 3 primary schools. As a reminder, the Massachusetts School Building Authority is the government agency that helps local communities fund capital school projects. Without their support and funding, it's quite unlikely that many communities would be able to afford or undertake a project of this scope and magnitude. So their assistance is pretty critical to us and to local communities. But I want to remind everybody that there's some really key drivers about what's going on at those primary schools around infrastructure and programming. From an infrastructure perspective, there's a whole host of deficiencies. And what I would encourage folks to do is to go on the project website, and I'll do it at the end so that everybody has it, and take a tour of those buildings. Because it truly gives you a sense from infrastructure and programmatic what some of the deficiencies are. And just to give a little highlight is, for example, Center School right now, and I have to look, is 36,000 square feet. According to the MSBA guidelines, in order to house the number of students that it has and to carry the programs it has, it should be closer to 57,000 square feet. So that kind of gives you a sense, and that problem exists across all those schools. So in 2017, we were fortunate that the MSBA Center School because of the enrollment issues at Center School. That happens to be the most overcrowded of our 3 primary schools. Invited us to participate in their program. Very early in that process, they came down and did a site visit of all 3 of our schools. And after that, they said to the community, if you would like to possibly look at another option that might solve the district-wide issues for your 3 primary schools, you can take advantage of that. They didn't tell us that we had to, but they gave us permission to explore that during the early phases. So that, from our perspective, was a pretty important opportunity. Through 2017, we did, before we actually had a designer and an owner's project manager on board, the district had to do some pretty critical work. The first of that was a very thorough enrollment study. The MSBA doesn't just let you say, we want to build a school to house so many students. They want to take you through a pretty rigorous process to verify what your enrollment needs to look like. That they look at birth rates, death rates, they look at what the growth in a community looks like historically, and they trend it forward. They consider a factor, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it, it's the if you build it, they will come factor. They recognize that typically when any new school opens, that it attracts new students. So based on that work that we did with the MSBA, they certified that for a district-wide school, we could be looking at an enrollment to build a building for 760 K through 2 students with an addition of 120 pre-K students. So that totals 880 for a certified enrollment. Right now, our enrollment at the 3 primary schools, including pre-K, is somewhere around 780. I think when I did the math, it was like 788, but it changes daily. So that was one of the first things we had to do. We also had to do a very rigorous assessment of the current physical conditions and what we do to maintain those conditions. They want to make sure that you are, to the extent that it's possible, maintaining the buildings as best you can. So we had to provide that to the MSBA, and then early in 2018, we began the process of hiring an OPM. Over the summer of 2018, we actually brought our OPM on board, and then in the fall, our designer came on board. Early fall, I would say, August of 2018. The thing I want to emphasize, and then I'm going to turn the mic over and they can walk you through the rest of the timeline, is this has been a very participatory process. From my perspective, the 2 things that this team has done really well is gotten feedback from the community, and by that I mean community at large. We hold forums and we really listen to what the community has to say to us. In fact, I think we're making adjustments based on some things we heard just last week. We've also reached out, extensively worked with our educators in the district to make sure that this building is in response to what the educational programming needs of the district are. We've worked with fire and first responders, so it's been a very collaborative process. The other thing that's been important for us and for these guys, from my perspective from these guys, is the MSBA is a really rigorous process. You have to cross all your T's and dot all your I's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 times. And having this kind of guidance has been really critical, and I think part of the reason that things have gone so smoothly so far. So without any further ado, I'm sorry if I took too long, I'm going to turn it over. They're going to walk you through the design process, some numbers in terms of cost comparisons and what drove some of our decisions, and where we are now. So I'll put this here.
Great. Thank you, Jane.
Yep.
So since 2018, when the team was joined, we've navigated through the MSBA's feasibility and schematic process. So that's 3 submissions, basically. The feasibility study, as many of you may know, watching the process develop, starts from just the earliest existing conditions investigations, understanding how the how the schools work and what the educational goals are, a complete visioning process that included a great deal of diverse representatives from the full community, and from there establishing goals, developing options, assessing those options, and ultimately getting down to the preferred plan. And we are at that point. We have the preferred plan. The purpose of the schematic design process, which we just completed, is to fully scope the plan. So it's to make sure that the budget and the basically the preliminary design for the project is completely flushed out, that it works, that it's delivering the educational goals and objectives, and a cost can be put to it. So that's where we are. It does not mean that design is done. Should this be successful to move forward, the design development phase would move us forward, as well as construction documents. We were talking about a total of 3 years between drawing, bidding, and construction, a little bit over 3 years, headed towards an occupancy in January of 2023. Anything else on schedule?
Nope. So as Bob mentioned, through schematic, we're looking to set a project budget. That'll be completed on Wednesday night with the school planning committee. That final budget will be set. That package, the schematic design package, will go to the be voted on September 4th by the school planning committee, and then submitted to the MSBA on September 11th. So that's kind of the timeline for budget and where we'll be looking on that.
So as far as the options and where we've come from, the MSBA, of course, established multiple grade configurations, looking at the center school itself, whether it's ad reno or new, as well as a district-wide solution for pre-K to 2, whether that's ad reno or new. We looked at multiple sites, the center school and the Parkview site. And we also looked at, in addition to these 7 options, we looked at base repairs for each one of the schools, because that's paramount to compare each one of these or multiple projects over time as compared to just fixing the buildings, not even addressing the educational needs. And we'll go into some detail on that. But ultimately, what was selected, the preferred solution, was an option that is the combined school on the Parkview site. It's built on the ball fields so that it's built behind and away from the existing Parkview school so that it can function. The reasons for the selection were primarily for equity. So by building a new school for all the pre-K2 students, they all experience that new construction and new environment immediately upon completion, as opposed to what might be decades of renovating one school at a time, and there are many students that really aren't getting the same educational experience. We also found that there were benefits in consolidation, whether that's from support systems inside the school, or opportunities for mentoring or to connect with the other grade levels on campus. We also found that this was the least cost overall over time to do this as one school, one project, as opposed to multiple projects over time, or even new versus repair. This one was also selected because it best meets the educational goals. So that's paramount. A few of the other options could meet the majority of the goals, but this one was head and shoulders above the rest as far as all the objectives we're setting out to look at. Walter will take us through the costs. What we're looking at here are the 3 big kind of rectangular areas that flag the center school only as a project with its cost, the district-wide configurations in the middle, and then the cost of repairs on the right.
Yeah, so what you're looking at here is a piece of information that was created during our PSR submission, which was our second submission to the MSBA. The values on this chart are based on historical averages from the MSBA available on their website of average cost per square foot construction on school projects. So nothing on the high end, nothing on the low end, just a simple way to compare projects in Massachusetts on a level playing field. What you're seeing on the far right, the 3 stacked bars, are the base repair options for the 3 schools, primary schools in Easton, the Parkview, Center, and Moreau. Parkview being on the bottom. Center being on the bottom, Parkview being in the middle, and Moreau Hall being on top. Again, like Bob mentioned, these schools are severely overcrowded and have a very limited square footage capacity. These base repairs do not address any type of overcrowding or the lack of square footage. They bring the buildings up to code. And what you see for values on there are based on bringing these buildings up to structural code, stretch energy code, making these buildings fully ADA, MAAB compliant. So each of the 3 buildings and the primary schools are valued assessed at somewhere between $2 and $4 million. What's important to note on that is that once you've attempted a project of roughly of 30 and reach the assessed value, or 30% of the assessed value, the requirement to bring the building up to all of those codes is hit under Massachusetts general law. So you replace a roof for about $300,000, you are at that value, and you are now triggering a full code compliant building, which assesses 0% of the educational program and brings in that square footage. Some other factors that are built into the base repairs are the usage of a CM at risk procurement method. While it helps to utilize this method because you're working with a CM that's going to be able to phase the project, it brings into some additional costs that are going to be incurred immediately. Other things such as swing space are accounted for in here because you'd be working in the building with students in it. You wouldn't be able to shut the building down. You'd have to utilize modular classrooms and work through a phased portion of the building. Moreau Hall would be one of the more difficult ones to utilize that, as there's no wings to kind of cordon off. It's one square building. So the 3 costs are the cost for the base repairs if you were to space them out over the next 10 years. The first one's escalated as we would any of the 7 options on the left. The next 2 are escalated out 5 years it's an aggressive timeline, but 5 years, so 2.5 years for each of them. They were to be undertaken, the total is about $86 million. Comparing that to the option that was selected by the school planning committee, which is the DW4 option, which sufficiently addresses the educational program and meets all of the square footage requirements. The district share is about $65 million of a $95 million project, about that cost.
Do you mind if I ask a point of
Yep,
clarification?
yep.
So on the repair of $86,501,000,
Yep.
that's the estimated cost to repair the 3 facilities.
Base, right?
But I think what you also said along the way is that should on any of those facilities we need to do a major repair, it may in fact trigger us having to do the entirety of those repairs to get it up to code.
Of one of those
And/or
buildings.
a substantial portion of one of those buildings.
Correct.
So in
Is that-
effect, what you're looking at, the cost for each one of those is each individual school as if it had triggered those repairs.
Correct.
Right, so I guess my point though, I'm trying to emphasize is that
It's not
if
just
we- If
undertaking.
we don't do this, we have looming over us $86.5 million worth of repairs that don't fundamentally fix the programmatic challenges that we have. And it's not as if we could necessarily wait, because if something happens that forced us to do some major repair like a roof replacement, it could force our hand to get sucked in to do the entirety of that.
It's sometimes referred
substantial
to.
portion of it.
Yep. It's sometimes referred to as the do nothing option, which, as you can see here, is not always the case.
Understood. So
Yep.
again, it reinforces the size of the opportunity for us, and that at some point we may have to do those other repairs if we don't get this MSBA project
Correct.
passed.
We will, yes.
So to add on that, or to frame it another way, the existing facilities, which are all more than a half century old, I think the center school one, which this was the impetus here, is 1954?
54, I believe.
65. So these buildings have a low assessed value. They're far past their useful life. There's a 30% threshold that would trigger this automatic code compliance. That is a question of when, not if, right? And if we go that route, your estimate is that that will cost $86.5 million. For just to bring them up to code and keep them in their current mid 20th century state,
Correct.
which would still be, it'd be great that it's up to code, but it would still be woefully undersized for current enrollment, because obviously they were designed 65 years ago and the town was quite a different place, right? So you're looking at more money for something that doesn't do as much and it does not fix any of the problems.
Correct.
Well, and more money, I mean, and this is where I'm gonna rely on, Chrissy Pruitt here's the example is, so we bring center school up to code. It's still not meeting DESI's requirements from a equitable space perspective, which means the likelihood that they're not going to keep, being patient with us as we try and create corrective solutions and say it's time for modular classrooms is looming. And those bear a cost as well.
Correct.
And none of that is reimbursable by the state.
Nope.
None of that 86 million.
That's taken account for in the ad reno scenarios as well, where we'd be working in the buildings and temping off areas and utilizing modular classrooms. That piece is non-reimbursable, even in an MSBA project. Just for additional information, the current 3 schools combined square footage is about 107,000 square feet. The new building is about 148,000 square feet. So
That's what's required
Right.
by the MSBA.
It's almost a 40% differential, not just because we like big buildings, but because that's what the
Educational
MSBA,
program.
I believe the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education of the state says
Recommend.
that is the appropriate amount of space that you need for the kids you have today, plus that about 12% growth margin that they
correct.
have laid out.
Yep.
And
So
that,
it would be more money for a worse outcome.
Correct.
and that growth margin of 12%, that in terms of square footage, that in theory is designed to accommodate future programmatic needs that we may, although we can't
And the
anticipate.
enrollment piece, that the 12%.
12% is enrollment, so I just did the back of the envelope on current enrollment today for the pre-K to 2 kids in Easton versus what the MSBA benchmark that has been set for these buildings would be.
So
And for true apples to apples, you would, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, have to be looking at, we're talking about a building that would be designed to meet 880 kids. Right now there's
780.
780-ish. Changes based on who's moving in or out on a day, but 780.
Mhm.
So you're designing to 880 for 780. But right now those 780 are in buildings that were probably designed for
580. Yeah.
Right.
680.
Understood. And so we feel confident that the design is set forth as something that would accommodate future programmatic needs, i.e. we are at this point where we have 3 facilities that don't currently satisfy DESE.
Correct.
And so over the useful life of these, we feel relatively confident that we've designed in the spaces.
But it's not only that we feel confident when they talk about the rigorous role of the MSBA. Every single thing that we have done, every single exploration, they want you to look at every possible scenario cost, and then they look at it. So we have to meet certain requirements every step of the way. So and they do these buildings all over the state, of course. So they're checking everything you do to make sure that it is appropriate, that it does fulfill the next 50 to 75 years of requirements for enrollment. So that it's like a triple set of checks and balances, working with professionals, working with our in-house professionals that supply the information, and then the MSBA with there's like a 12-person panel that review these things with a fine-tooth comb. So
Excellent.
you can be assured when questions like, well, what did you think of this? Did you think of that? What about, what if you only did this or that? We've been through every single piece of that with supervision from the OPMs and the MSBA, and all of the meetings have been, filmed and minutes, so people can go back and if they're really interested in seeing all the discussion around it, they can go back and look at those too.
Perfect.
12%. That's what it allows for growth.
For the MSBA.
So
I just want to share one thing that did come up in the 2017 school year. We went through our coordinated program review. The Easton Public Schools did through DESE, which is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We were cited for civil rights violation. That are students that receive English language learners that receive English language instruction were not given an adequate space to learn the second language. We had to adjust programming needs within the center school. We were able to make those accommodations at Parkview only because of low enrollment of students that were designated as English language learners. So I think it's really important because when we went back to them and said, well, we're hoping to get a new building, they said, too bad, you need to come up with immediate change. And so another population was outsourced so that our English language learners could be learning in an adequate space. This is coming up as our population continues to grow. It also was a violation for some of our special service requirements, the way that we provide special education as well. We were told that we would have to provide module units. We did look into that. They were looking at $100,000 cost for getting modular units in place. So those are the concerns that we're thinking about as our population continues to increase in various sections of our schooling.
When you speak of this situation, when you speak about in that example of the English, as learning English, then you are, when you talk about outsourcing, your first thoughts go toward modular, unfortunately.
We did because we needed more space. And so where would we be able to have more space in a building that didn't have space to begin with? So basically we needed to build onto the building, and the modular units appeared to be the best option at that time when we were looking at it.
And I would say, to underscore what Jane said in the beginning, people should really go to the website and look at the videos. There's one that's just a trailer if you have like only 5 minutes, at least watch that one. But if you have a chance to watch all of them, people are shocked when they see how small the areas are for some of these, and like virtually closets have been redone for small learning, and nurses' rooms without bathrooms in them, and so I think people will be really surprised to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, back to you.
Yep.
City. Sorry.
I'm just going to quickly mention, we talked base repair, which satisfies no programmatic needs. On the left, you'll see the center school options, ad reno, and new. Those range anywhere from 43 million total projects, so that's both bars stacked, to 51 million. If Easton were to undertake just the center school project, you'd be looking at one of those options roughly at a full design. You can similarly take the three options for Parkview and Moreau and stack the same bars. The only difference is you'd still be submitting statement of interest with the MSBA, who receive about 120 applicants a year and accept about 15. So you're talking about, 1 in 8 that get in, and then you'd be looking at that again for the next submission. So you could either be looking at a full share for a total project for the next 2 buildings, or waiting until the MSBA is ready to accept Easton in for those options.
So this is a one-time opportunity, essentially.
So what I'll do is I'll just walk us through some of the design highlights, and happy to come back and give more detail, but basically we have a plan that's evolved over time. It's evolved and been shaped by community meetings, by things that we've heard at the school building committee and various other venues. But on the Parkview site, you're looking at a white shape, which we call a building footprint. That's the new school built on the fields, the softball fields that exist. Parkview, as I had mentioned, would stay functioning in use. It'd be in front and would be demolished after the building's built. In the updated site plans, we were able to maintain both of the softball fields. At one point, we only had one, so this is great that we can fit the entire school program, outdoor play space, parking, circulation needs, and still replicate the 2 softball fields. In this site plan, we're also looking at things that have evolved to show open courtyards that become outdoor learning spaces. And the idea of having them open versus enclosed is better for maintainability. We also have located the gym much closer to the fields. This new footprint, this new plan also is more efficient and should save costs. So we've seen that routinely in each phase. As we've evolved the design and listened to comments, we've also been able to reduce the costs over time. The overall floor plan that you're looking at here shows a bunch of large yellow spaces in the middle. Those are shared community spaces. You can probably pick out what is the gymnasium with the game lines on the upper middle. That gymnasium is connected to a stage that's 2-sided, so the stage could open up to the gymnasium side for very large gatherings, all school, or the stage could open up onto what's just below it, which is the cafeteria. So that would be a cafetorium space that's common in elementary schools. And down at the bottom in the middle, we have another piece of cafeteria. So we've taken our total cafeteria square footage and broken it into a medium and a small size space. And that's deliberate to cater to students that need a smaller environment or maybe less distraction, less noise. In between those 2 cafeterias is the kitchen area. You can see off to the left is the main entry, the visitor entry. As the plan has evolved, we went from having 2 separate entries to a combined single main entry for control purposes, and that's where the administration is shown in red. Each one of the academic wings that branches off of the center of the building shows blue spaces. Those are classrooms with purple rooms nested in between. Those are special education spaces. This is all very deliberate to break down the scale of the building. So big picture, we've divided the school so that the ground level is all pre-KK. The second floor is all grade 1 to 2. But each one of the students exists within a smaller wing and a smaller cluster of rooms that, of course, can be themed and turned into something that's identifiable, maybe growing with the students as they move through the school. So if we took the pre-K wing and we said that's the Frothingham Farmers, it's about planting, it's seeds, it's young children. As they grow and go to kindergarten, we're talking about ponds. And then as they get older, 1st grade, we're talking about forest, about woodlands. and then eventually, thinking from ground to forest to sky, the Ames Adventurers. These are just ideas. It's just an example of how you can brand and ultimately break down the school so that a large school then starts to seem very small, intimate, and purposeful to each one of the children. In the center of the school, in that cafeteria, you can also see this kind of looped circulation path. It's not a slide. It's actually a main ramp. This is actually very important, not only for this age group, but as a tenet of universal design. So we'd like to design beyond just handicapped accessibility and make sure that the school is purpose-built for any kind of impairment, whether it's cognitive, physical. The idea of having a main ramp certainly allows young children, little feet, pre-K and K, to easily navigate up to art rooms or the media center, but also for aging population to circulate as well. It gives options. The school, of course, is outfitted with elevators, but what we're trying to do is create the same experience for all users, so there isn't a wonderful main stair in one place and an elevator around the corner. This is for one and all, and leads and helps feed into the idea of having more of a journey within the school. So we're taking space throughout the school, outside of the classrooms, and creating not only education that occurs outside the classroom, but kind of a journey through the school, filled with bits of history and bits of discovery for very meaningful for this age group. This is just a bird's eye view of the overall site plan. You can see kind of to the top right, that's Lothrop. That's kind of the back of the school. The front of the school is facing more inbound. We have separate bus and separate car loop, but they both drop off to the main entry. We have plenty of green space. We really don't want the school set within a parking lot. We want it set within a natural environment and make the approach to the school very much inviting for walkers, bikers, and have an outdoor feel.
Bob.
Sorry. Can you maybe talk a little bit about parking in the bus?
Yes. Yeah,
Because
if you
I
go back.
know that campus has some concerns in that regard.
Yeah.
And then we did a lot of work. You guys did a lot of work around that.
Yes, so we had a robust, did you want to speak, Dan? Okay. We had a robust traffic study that was more than just the site. Typically, a traffic study would deal with the site and the immediate adjacent streets. We had our traffic engineer go out to all the feeder streets that come into the entire campus. This project, of course, in its location, has the great benefit of not only making right the circulation for this school, but also making betterments for the entire campus for all the schools on site. Since they are staggered or phased in time, we've incorporated a few things. So what we're looking at here on the bottom of the page is Lothrop Street. Up towards the top is Spooner Street as it enters, and even above that, which is off of the screen, would be Columbus. From Columbus down to Lothrop, you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a new roadway that connects. That's to help provide some relief, more ability to gain access or to exit the site. It's something that can also be used to improve the circulation to the other schools as they're opening or departing. On this site proper, you can see a whole bunch of yellow rectangles. We have buses that would enter off of Spooner Street or Columbus and then queue up. Is a total of 16 buses, so that's the cumulative of all three schools that fit neatly into this queue. We also have coming in off of Spooner, or it could be off of Columbus, car circulation that would travel from Spooner into the site, straight down the right-hand side of this site plan, around the building, and then loop to the front entrance where you can see that kind of horseshoe shape with all the little red cars. That's very intentional so that we can get, it's in excess of 75 cars off the street, and again, that is more than the queue from each one of the individual schools combined. So the intent here is very much to get the cars off the street, not have backups onto the street, and pull them right into and manage them on the site. We have the ability to exit 3 different directions for cars as well as for buses. On the bottom, along Lothrop, you can see there's kind of 2 entries. The one to the right-hand side is really just for emergency access and first responders. That is intended to be a gated access, and that allows for the maneuvering of emergency vehicles to get into the site from where they exist across the street. And as vehicles would enter in that direction along that road at the bottom of the school. That's also we have a nurse's entry, which is separate, and our service entry is located there as well. There's a lot to talk about. Those are some of the highlights. Anything else?
I think it's worth. Oh,
I was just gonna say, just the gated off after the buses arrive, that we will gate
Oh, yeah.
off that area.
So where the bus loop is right now, we've seen this in a number of schools. The intent is that that queue of yellow buses is gated at each end. So after the drop-off period, that becomes kind of part of the play, part of the contiguous pathway from the school to all the green space and the play space. So that paved area becomes, in effect, hard surface play, hopscotch, foursquare. It's a number of things. It's making dual use, and then at the end of the school day, the gates can be opened, and then that can be part of the bus queue again.
I think it's worth noting for anyone who's super interested in traffic management that the study and the information about the traffic study are on this project website as well.
Yes.
So we were looking at the bird's eye view, and moving on to materials. I can tell you that a lot of thought was put into the materials. 3 layers of thought. First, one of the things that we're trying to do very much here is relate to young children. So warmth of palette and scale relating to nature, relating to residential qualities is important. So we've selected materials that are familiar in what they might see in residential construction. We also wanted to break down the scale of the building. So at 2 stories, you can see it has a stone base, but the stone base is very low, and that's intentional. Maybe becomes a seat wall as well for children. It also allows the windows of the building to come down lower to the ground. That kind of heavy wood line in the middle is a front porch, so we're able to take the 2-story height of a school, rather than having a 2-story wall. We've got really kind of porch and covered areas around the perimeter of the building, intended to be done with timber and wood look, so that it really, again, breaks down the scale of the building. And then the rest of what we call the facade, the exterior, is use of phenolic panels and fiber cement. These can be installed in kind of residential quality scale, or with a wood look that relates very much to both nature and to residential construction. This is a look at front porches and some ideas or some inspirational images we've seen in some other schools, where it's an extension of indoor learning that can go outside, even in inclement weather. They can be highly utilized. So there's 3 of these on the perimeter of the building. All of the materials that we've selected, and again, it's not final design, but we're done with a full presentation of a range of materials that were meeting durability, low maintenance, as well as life cycle cost analysis. And again, what we've got so far is use of stone. These are some examples of where the stone has been used on some school projects. The phenolic panels you can see here on the left, that's a school in Andover, Mass, where it's got kind of a very residential quality scale to it. On the right, larger scale panels that are used in a different setting. And then the fiber cement can also be used, that can come in kind of a board look. These are tried and true materials by today's standards, and part of modern exterior veneer wall systems that we see. All of them, again, vetted for life cycle cost, durability, and maintenance. And I think from there, one thing I skipped over in the plan was that we're currently showing or accommodating central administration. On the floor plan, to the upper right corner, there's a cluster of red spaces. That is the central administration office suite, something that we're studying and we're putting a cost to. It can be connected to this building but function entirely separate, so it's not as though people coming to central admin would gain access into the school. On the site plan, we also have parking just on the kind of north right-hand side, as well as to the lower right-hand side, that can service the central administration. And so part of what we wanted to present here are the central administration as an option and associated costs.
And that was driven by questions from the public that wanted to know, why are we paying for rent on Oliver Street for the administrative offices when we could incorporate this? And so we did a pretty extensive investigation of the cost, which you have up there. But also beyond the cost, there were a lot of other things to think about, you know, when we make decisions looking at long-term, the next 50 to 75 years, and also the risk that comes up with that. So what are some of the things that could happen, you know, aside from the actual cost of rent increases? What if the building's sold? What if, you know, is there another place you could put the central administration that's close to the schools? There isn't. So there are a lot of things to think about that also.
Yeah, even secure entry, for example. Right now, it's a shared entry with a number of businesses, and normally you would see something more secure.
So kind of just briefed on it right there, but what we were able to do, and actually just quickly to update you, we did have a community forum last week where we heard, and we feel we took a not a strange approach to this, but maybe a conservative approach on the end that may look like it takes a long time to create a payoff, where we heard some information from a resident that maybe that annual rent increase of 2.85% might be on the low end. So what we're going to do, just jump back one slide, when we have our final reconciliation numbers with the full central admin, is compare that 2.85 and also run another trend line on the next graph, maybe somewhere closer to 5 or 6% of an annual rent increase. That might be something more standard for commercial rent in Massachusetts. But this is based on historical averages over the last 11 years from the information from 50 Oliver Street for the central administration. The $510 a square foot is what was at the PSR estimate, 5,500 square feet for the central administration based on programmatic needs, nothing extra. And then just the standard calculation led us to this chart right here. Good. Next, sorry, graph right here. That showed a 34-year break-even point at year 2056, starting in year 2022.
That's a point assuming 2.85.
Correct.
I think when you run the number at a higher.
Yep. And it's also going to, we're going to adjust the cost per square foot. We're getting the numbers kind of as we speak. We had a reconciliation meeting today with our two estimators. We're going to get their final numbers sometime tomorrow and be able to restructure that chart that hadn't been updated until.
And so you'll have those much more refined per square foot cost numbers for the school planning meeting.
Wednesday night,
which is
correct.
a public meeting, and you're going to have two trend lines. One, which is the historical look back on the rent, a more market standard rent increase annually, and also spreading that debt schedule to a 30-year bond.
Correct. And we'll adjust the cost per square foot as well based on our new numbers that we're developing.
And just to be clear, the school planning committee will be making a decision on Wednesday evening in terms of whether or not we're recommending to move this project forward, including central office.
Correct. Yep.
And none of the question, is any of that particular add-on covered by the MSBA process?
None.
So that's ours. And
Correct.
if you go, so if you go back a slide, just by sake of explanation, so right now it's a $92,000 annual cost. Under this particular proposal and fact pattern, it's an $18,000 monthly payment or a $216,000 annual cost.
Or
For 34.
30 some odd years.
Right, 34
The
year.
life of let's be
break-even.
clear about the life expectancy of the new building.
Minimum 50 to 75 would be the expectation.
Yep.
Got it.
So some of the questions
So you
that
get
came up.
15 years out of it.
Well, that's at
The low end.
Yeah,
So there.
and you're paying $100,000 more annually.
Right.
But there's, again, so that's under the current projection, the current
Right.
model. There's other
I can.
factors that are
Do you
important to
have
consider.
some of those slides?
Do you have the
I mean, climate
after?
lead
Thank
won't
you.
move
Yeah.
too much from that model.
If you move a point here and there on 30-year debt schedules, you can make some dramatic. I mean, so there could be. I would imagine even with a 30-year bond, it would be more costly in the beginning. You're gonna have a higher upfront cost for that bonding for the construction project. For
So-
sure.
We looked at, Dottie talked about all of the things that got looked at in the meeting when this was getting discussed. So we looked at what would a future cost be to build a central administration, and we have those figures. We talked about the possibility of using, there's been conversations about could you move to RO, could you move to Moreau, all of those costs look significantly higher than,
Absolutely.
yeah.
One of the,
Is there any, this may be a little off topic, but there's been a lot of community forums. There's been a lot of informational sessions.
Yeah.
Has there been feedback on support one way or another for central
Surprisingly,
admin?
it's been
here?
pretty neutral. It's been pretty neutral.
I see both sides.
Yeah.
Right,
it-
yeah.
I think it explains why we haven't necessarily been able to move out of where we're at and build on to someplace in a new fashion. But I also think that, and to your point that I'm sure we'll get to, there are other compelling reasons why there's benefits to having central
Pros and
administration.
cons, I
Right.
think it was
So it's an
pros.
investment for the community as well. So I guess it helps illustrate both sides of the equation.
Yeah. So there are some pros, there are some cons.
Tom, nice segue.
One of the,
Right? See that
one
up
of
in
the
there?
things, and maybe somebody who was at the meeting can speak to the whole piece around the network.
Yep, I will. So central administration at 50 Oliver, if you have the next slide. One of the items we heard is that there is fiber run right now from the campus to 50 Oliver that exists as required. It's not everywhere in town, and should central offices not be located at 50 Oliver and not at the campus, in order for business to be conducted, fiber would need to be run. It's a dedicated dark fiber line that the school needs for security purposes. For comparison, we put one in on one of our most recent projects, about a 1.5 mile run for upwards of $300,000. And
Is there dark fiber? Is there fiber going to the high school or?
it's all at the it exists
There's
at the
not an
campus.
Fiber that could be used and pulled as lateral, like,
This is a
It's
fiber
It's
network
run
that
on
we
your
maintain.
yep.
We don't have, it's a town maintained fiber network between our buildings. We don't have extra fiber anywhere, period. It goes from
Right.
here to some stations.
Yep.
Um,
It's the
critical
DPW's.
infrastructure for,
Yeah.
we,
How did it get to 50 Oliver?
is that
Back-
where schools are?
No, how did it get there though? Back in the day, like 5
Someone
years
ran
ago?
it,
Did
yeah.
we just,
Oh, no.
I'm
it's
sorry,
not-
did we just spend $300,000 5 years ago?
No,
I'm asking.
not to my knowledge.
How long has central office been there?
Many, many years. So at some point, it was brought into the fiber network.
Yep.
So I know there was conversation about what about the industrial park up there? You're talking an exponential amount of money to run fiber up there that may make it cost prohibitive.
And if you're saying it's $300,000 a mile, I'll just put that in reference because probably everyone knows where I live, right? So my house on Elm Street is 1.5 miles from the schools. So Oliver is probably like 1.25 miles. So to go beyond that, maybe another mile or two to get to the industrial park or,
That's
you know, it's a significant distance.
Well, to be clear, the campus that we're looking at already is on the fiber network.
Correct.
There'll be no fiber cost of central
Right.
admin there. Yeah.
Yep.
Again, it was just, I think it's.
It was
what
something
I'm-
that
what
came
I'm
up at our
trying-
last meeting,
right,
or
what
one
I'm
of our
trying to
last meetings.
demonstrate is that the school planning committee really talked about all possibilities when they were having this conversation. I think you guys did some research about what it would be to do the work at Moreau Hall for us.
Yep.
Again, we wanted to be as transparent and thorough as we possibly could in terms of how we have this conversation, and then make a decision on
Yep.
Wednesday evening.
Yep. So we met with, I know it was looked at at the school facilities level and school with the district about Oliver Ames High School and RO, and those buildings do not have the capacity without displacing someone else at them. Moreau or Center, similar. You'd be looking, if you were to renovate 5,500 square feet for those offices, those buildings are about anywhere from 30 to 40,000 square feet. you'd trigger the base repair codes almost instantly working on that type, and you'd be looking at similarly those $26 million worth of
Right.
ADA stretch code building, all of those for Moreau or Center School. Yeah, we can go to the
Can we
timeline.
go over the pros and cons? We kind of
Yeah.
went by very quickly the pros and cons of the central
Yeah.
administration at
At 50 Oliver, at the
Yep.
No, at the campus.
at the campus. Yeah. Yeah. I can speak to it. I know Leisha had worked on these quite a bit, but she has noted quite a bit that the proximity for being able to respond to incidents on campus, having parents accessibility instead of driving from one school to central administration for a meeting, they'd be right back there. The cost of rent, you would know what you'd be paying for the life of that building. The other piece of information that I think we haven't even touched on is that they recently went out to bid this year,
Right.
and there was one bid. So had at some point the owner not decided to put that building up, there would have been a scramble very quickly to find a location, and most likely would not have been in Easton, which I'm not sure meets the district's requirements.
So just to clarify that for anyone who's watching this, when we say out to bid, the schools issued a request for proposals from landlords.
For what's required on there.
Meeting some of the requirements for their central office needs. There was a single bid, it was the existing landlord, and there's no requirement that landlord, outside of these 3-year agreements that are in vacuums at those times, continue to provide that service.
Correct.
Right, just want to be clear about that.
Appreciate it.
And that ties to the stability that
Exactly.
bullet up there.
Excuse me. So, sorry, go ahead.
Are you gonna go to the cons?
Yep, obviously, there is an additional square footage cost, there is an additional cost to the taxpayers, and it increases the energy costs for the building proportionally. It would utilize the same systems, displacement air for HVAC and standard building boilers.
Yeah, but wouldn't that cost be offset by the savings of cost from where it exists now?
I don't know what their agreement states if they
All
owe.
inclusive?
I believe it's all included in the 92.
That eases it.
Yep. I don't know that there are bills outside of that. I know there are no maintenance bills. I was told that, but I don't know that there's no energy use.
Thank you for going back.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to the next steps. I'm going back. So, looking forward, I know I'm not sure if Connor has. I'm sure he has briefed you on what we'd be looking at for a timeline, maybe. But looking for a special town meeting warrant, and pending that special election ballot on November 5th. I know that we've been working to set up a special town meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I included a kind of summary of this with some
Okay.
further explanation in the board's notes. The board does have on their agenda for later tonight to open 2 town meeting warrants. One of them for regular business in the fall, but one of them specifically for October 28th for this project.
Yep. So there's standard language that the MSBA provides on their website. I've provided it to Connor for use for the special town meeting and also for the ballot. We do not have the option of changing anything other than where they have blanks for us to fill in percentages, values, and the name of the district
Packet.
as well. Even once we fill them in, they go to the MSBA legal team for review prior to those items happening.
So it's important to note that people have to go to town meeting and then they have to go to the ballot to vote for it. You have to do both.
Town
Correct.
meeting is a 2/3 majority.
And
And ballot is simple majority.
correct. Meanwhile, while the town is working through those items, the MSBA will be working through the schematic design submittal, and they'll be working with the district, PMA, and Perkins Eastman on the maximum facilities grant. We will have a very, very dialed-in amount that we're expecting. We've worked with them previously on other projects and also have received feedback on previous submissions on where they're leaning on certain items. One piece, I know a lot of people hear reimbursement rate. MSBA has a list of 30 to 50 categorically ineligible items or cost per square foot caps on certain items. Examples would be 8% of direct site costs. Once you've reached that, there is no more reimbursement on site costs. That tends to get hit very quickly on projects. Another one would be VAT abatement. They do not reimburse for any VAT abatement in schools. The MSBA has a cost per square foot cap at right now $333 a square foot. That means that anything, that's not to say that construction in Massachusetts, school construction in Massachusetts is not estimated to be $333 a square foot. What that is the MSBA's way of spreading the wealth around the Commonwealth, so to get as many communities involved in the program as possible. Right now, we're looking closer to $500 a square foot for construction.
And so just to be clear, because I don't know if we've mentioned it already, we have been given a reimbursement rate of 52.26% from the MSBA, and in fact, so far during feasibility and schematic, we have been, I think all of our costs have been reimbursed at the 52.26%, that everything we have submitted to date has been considered eligible. But it's really important to be clear that once we move past this phase is probably when we are going to see that our costs, there will be costs of this project that are not eligible for reimbursement. So your 52.26 drops down to a different kind of effective rate.
Which has been shown in all of your.
Yes.
Yep, that's realized in everything we've done. We never work, it's never based on a set.
As we would like.
As much as everyone would like, yeah.
You mentioned site cost.
Yep.
8%.
The cap is 8% of the direct site cost. So if you had a $50 million direct trade,
So what could you define site cost?
anything digging in the ground,
Any foundations?
even anything concrete below the concrete.
Does that include landscaping, pavement, asphalt?
Correct. Everything.
8%.
8% of the direct site cost. So that would not be reimbursed. So if your site costs were $100 million, if your direct trade costs were $100 million and your site was $8 million, you would be reimbursed on that $8 million. Anything over that would be completely ineligible.
Okay.
So there's a lot of back and forth, and it's a lot of fine print. But we've worked with the MSBA before. We know where they are, and we try to identify them as quickly as
But
possible.
again, I think that when you look back at the kind of what we were looking at for estimates right now of the 65, 35 rough,
Yep.
district share and MSBA, I think that we are in
Right.
that ballpark.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of
It's been consistent since the
from
very,
when I was on
yes,
that
that's
committee.
correct.
It's
Right.
never really
That's
moved from
correct.
Yep. And so just so everyone, that does include central administration, that estimate.
So all the cost estimates that we put forward do.
Correct.
Right.
Not the base repairs. No additional square footage. So, pending successful items there. One other item to note, the reason for the special town meeting and the special election, October 30th would be the target date for the MSBA board approval of the schematic design for the town of Easton. From that, it's important to note that from that date, it kicks in a clock of 120 days for the town of Easton to obtain local funding for the project, to show that Easton is going to be able to provide the necessary monies for the project. So that's why the special town meeting would be happening so quickly. From there, we'd be looking to move into detailed design, which is about 1 year. Detailed design, 60% drawings, 90% drawings are 3 more submissions that would take place to the MSBA. 100%, there is no submission to the MSBA. That's when we'd be moving towards the bidding phase, which is about a 2-month phase. And then we'd be looking for shovels in the ground early March, contracts executed, shovels in the ground early March of 2021 on the existing campus. And tentative new buildings substantially complete in late October. With a holiday move-in, so we'd have the building complete, start bringing in furniture, and then potentially move just Parkview or all 3 schools at once. the necessity would be to get Parkview out of Parkview and into the school, because we need to cordon off and demolish and construct the softball fields. So traffic would be working, all the traffic patterns would be in at that time, and then we'd be looking at bringing the softball fields and the landscaping in after the demolition and abatement.
And I think it's worth noting when you're talking about things so far out, I mean, you're still, and Bob talked about this is still in process. A lot of these things will continue to be developed as we move forward. You know, traffic patterns, you know, what are things going to look like up there during the construction process itself. So I want to make it really clear with anybody who's watching this or looking at timelines and dates and looking at drawings that they're liable to see things continue to evolve and get refined.
Yeah, we've already had the last couple of meetings, we received some good input from abutters, and there's changes that we plan to make. Pens are down right now, but as soon as we pick up on the other side, those are being enacted.
I just want to highlight about the central administration potentially being at this site as well, is that it takes away the fear of the unknown. And I think that that's something when you are renting a property, there's always that fear of the unknown, what could happen. And I think that if it were on that site, it does take that fear of the unknown away, which is a nice factor.
So the one last thing, I don't know if you were
Okay.
going to mention, is we do have 4 more community forums scheduled, all of which will be in October. I think October 8th there are 2,
And 22nd.
and October 22nd there are 2. And again, all of this will get posted on the project website, which is Easton, EESproject.com. And that includes all information about the project. I've needs to get updated this week with a couple more frequently asked questions that have come up, but I think it's pretty well up to date. And I know that you may have other questions.
I'll jump in quickly. I know one question that is on everyone's mind is about cost, tax impact, local tax impact, and that the school planning committee, like we mentioned, is going to be reviewing the cost estimates and working through a value management scope exercise on Wednesday night, where the decision will be made on the final budget for the project. That budget will go to MSBA for their review. On the 4th, the submission will go in, and as soon as we have those budget numbers on Wednesday night, PMA, Perkins Eastman, and the school planning will be working with the town on developing the local tax impact based on those budget numbers that we are going to finalize on Wednesday night. I believe we are scheduled to be back here.
Yes, so the project, the schematic design budget will be set on Wednesday night on the 21st. I'll bring rough per $5 million increment impact on the tax rate numbers. This will be really rough, but just to help the school planning committee make decisions. Once we lock that budget number, and Wendy and I will refine detailed project cost figures and estimated tax impact for median home and condo owners for the meeting of the select board on September 23rd. That's going to be at Frothingham, just in case there's people who are interested, want to come. I believe the school committee will be invited, the finance committee will be invited. But Wendy and I will have very detailed estimates on median homeowner tax impact if this were to advance, to give to the board, because at that meeting we also would be voting to establish formally November 5th as the debt exclusion election. So that'll be 6 o'clock, September 23rd, a regularly scheduled meeting to take place at Frothingham to provide some extra space if folks want that.
Can you talk a little bit about what happens if it doesn't pass?
So we've talked a little bit about it. So first of all, it's the kind of what if no. And obviously what will happen if this doesn't pass is that we will immediately be removed from the MSBA process. We have to.
You have 120 days.
Right, we have to, but assuming it doesn't pass
Correct.
in the 120-day time frame, we will be removed from the MSBA process. Essentially, you have to go back to the starting gate again, which means we would need to start submitting statement of interest for all 3 primary schools again. As Walter Jennifer mentioned, they get about 100 applications every year. They maybe take 15 to 20 at the most. And I think we need to remember that the MSBA is looking at communities who are receptive to this kind of project. We would have said no. So I think that how they might look at the community of Easton may be a little bit different than it was in 2017 when we were selected. Can't guarantee that. That is speculation. I think the other thing to remember is that if they did select us again, that at that point, the entire cost of feasibility and schematic design is entirely carried by the community, the local community. Right now, we're getting reimbursed at our 52.26% rate. That wouldn't happen.
And it's worth noting it's being paid for out of mitigation funds.
Right, exactly.
That won't necessarily exist.
So that's been about $1 million for the feasibility study in this. So in 10 years, you know, what would that be? Probably double.
Right.
And it would be 2 years of intensive time and resources and money really down the drain.
Right. And that's why the MSBA doesn't fund it again, because
Right.
it's not just our time and resources,
Right.
it's theirs as well. They've invested a significant amount of time and resource into this project.
Is it fair to point out that, so not only are we starting at square one submitting again,
Yep.
assume that it takes the same amount of time as last time. It took us 6 years from submitting to being welcomed into the program.
Yes.
So if you went back to that big picture overview, we're looking at perhaps if everything goes smoothly.
All the way back.
We're looking at 2023.
The first
No, sorry, actually, I did mean that.
Oh, you meant the.
But we're looking at perhaps early 2023 for a move-in date. From beginning to end, we will have been submitting statements of interest in these buildings from 2011. It's a 12-year window, right? So we'll have that experience. It takes from start to finish between statement of interest, being welcomed into the program, the 2 years of feasibility, the years of design, construction, and moving in. We're looking at up to 12 years, right? Which mirrors the fact that you have less than 10% of communities being welcomed in every year. So if this did not pass and the town were to start anew, we could be talking about what? In the 30s.
Mm.
The
And
2030s.
And your current buildings are
You're not even
still
talking yet.
deteriorating.
That's right.
These buildings are going to be 4 years old by the time this
Right.
new one.
It's
and
going to
then
take a large effort to maintain the
Just to
building.
keep them.
Yes.
And-
keep going until we get a new
Huge
school.
financial effort.
The other thing to note too is that when you are accepted into the project, it all is based on the cohort that applied. So as many of us know, there are schools out there within other communities that are hundreds of years old. And so we don't know, we can't predict who's going to apply in those coming years. So the fact that we were accepted is actually like a miracle.
Yeah.
When, just a point of information, has the reimbursement rate been going up
The reimbursement.
over time? Has the MSBA been reimbursing more of project costs for cities in town?
They have changed. They have adjusted their cost per square foot cap from $299 or $275 to the $333 over the past 12 years, right? 12,
Has-
13 years.
Public school building construction ever cost?
Yeah, that doesn't indicate that it's cheaper.
No, no, it does not.
It just
No.
because the cost is going up, also the total cost is going up, so as a percentage
Probably
it's
adding
smaller.
faster.
Well,
Right.
and if we want to look at our experience here in town,
That's a good point.
the schools that we've already constructed, RO, and then the middle school, high school, those were a higher reimbursement rate. So.
Yep.
I think it's fair to say, for smaller project costs, I think it's fair to say. And that, I mean, from my perspective, that's looking at the cost piece, which I know is really important, but the other piece is the unknown. You know, what happens when the boilers at center school don't make it through another 5 winters? You know, I think there are going to be things that are going to come, that are going to impact us, that are going to cost money, and the town will need to determine how that gets funded.
And
I think it's
those-
also, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
It's fair to say that it's not sounding an alarm. If you watch those videos, this is a real imminent possibility of these schools, like you mentioned, the boiler at Center School. I mean, they're hanging by a thread. So watch the videos.
Mark is just saying what I was about to say. I was amazed at those videos, and when you add this year upon year upon year of potentially getting it again, and you see what position these schools are in now. I really hadn't experienced them much since the 70s, when a couple of my kids went to center school, and it wasn't all that great then. And so just looking at these videos ties in these extra years, and
Well, I think part of the charm, you know, when my kids went to Moreau Hall, and you know, the principal was awesome, and the teachers were great, and your kids loved to go to school every day, and when you're in there, like, you don't really, you're looking at how happy your kids are, and you're forgetting they have to cut through someone else's room to go to the next room to the next room. Then when you're out of it and you look at it, you're like, I just didn't look at it from that perspective. So I think that, you know, the design was so thoughtfully done, because some of the concerns were, how do you take these 3 schools with 3 identities and merge them together and not make your little preschooler feel like they're going into this monstrosity? And that's why, you know, the design is geared towards smaller children, and as they're getting a little bit bigger, in the classrooms, in the fixtures. And it's also designed that they'll still have their identities, but they'll also be coming together. So it was really a lot of thought going into that. And you know, you talk about the journey to getting through the school. The journey actually begins from the time they leave the car, and what does that look like coming up to the front of the building, and what can they see and touch and experience. I know that all 3 of the schools really pride themselves on their outdoor classrooms and their gardens, and not just the kids, but the parents and the grandparents and the community. To have the outdoor learning space here, there was a lot of thought brought in when we interviewed the designers and the architects. That was really important to us as a selection committee, to see who actually brought in landscape architects and traffic designers. And so these are things that were very thoughtfully done, and I really appreciate everybody's input. I think 3 of us, Tom, Mark, and I, have all been on the board at one point or another through the 2-year process. And I think we all said that it's quite a process, and it's very well done.
by the way, let me amend the timeline. It was the early 90s.
I'll say this. I went to center
Time
school.
is,
I went to center school from 85 to 89, and I was in there during one of the tours. It hasn't changed. It's just deteriorated.
And I did want to point out that we will be hosting open houses in the evenings and on Saturdays, and those dates we'll let the community know. We'll advertise those for anyone that would like to see the buildings themselves. The videos are amazing, and they do show a lot of what is happening in the deterioration, as Mr. Lamb has mentioned. But if anybody's interested in seeing it for themselves, we will be having those events as well.
Next up, opening of special town meeting warrant. So we are going to have the proposed date of October 28th for the special town meeting warrant that will just cover the MSBA project, the funding article only. We talked about whether it made sense to have the school and our regular fall town meeting at the same time. And we really want the focus to be on the schools and not rush through, you know, all of this is really important business. So we will have a separate fall town meeting for regular town business proposed on November 12th.
Tuesday.
And just for the schools on this October 28th date.
Right. So if you like, I can give a little background on this. So as part of this project, there's going to be 2 really critical milestones for the MSBA, or Easton Early Elementary School project. For people who either are supportive and want to see it pass, or people who are not supportive and do not want to, there's 2 kind of democratic participatory exercises that you need to take part in. One is a town meeting, and the town meeting's function is to appropriate funding and authorize borrowing. So that's what this would be. As Walter had alluded to under the early elementary school presentation, there's very prescribed language from the MSBA for the borrowing authorization that would be needed for the cost of the project. That is something that will be, that he mentioned, we had a meeting with some of our public safety and elections folks to have a really good conversation, and members of school leadership about what is it what is this going to look like? Because obviously there's usually high turnout with these things. We actually went back and we looked at our historical records, and we've seen in Easton instances of over 2,000 people showing up for the town meetings that where they're voting on those borrowing authorization articles associated with an MSBA project. I don't know if any of you go around and count our room occupancies, but 2,000 is a lot more than the OA auditorium can hold. In the past, what has been done is running multi-room and in some cases, I think, multi-building town meetings with numerous deputized moderators and simulcasting. Organizing town meetings is a task in and of itself, having kind of a live multi-100-person democratic process that's making decisions about hundreds of millions of dollars. We thought, and someone in the school said, well, is there somewhere bigger we can use, right? So we normally use OA. And we reached out to Stonehill. They have a sports complex which can fit up to 5,000 people, and thankfully, Stonehill has said that they could make that happen and work with us on that, so that we could have a special town meeting devoted solely to this article, because we not only anticipate a lot of people coming, we anticipate that as much as we're trying to kind of hit the pavement and get information out there are going to be people who have questions, and probably a lot of them. And we want to create an environment where people can participate fully and safely, logistically. And so what I'm proposing based on that kind of review and what Stonehill has told us is that the board consider opening, or calling more specifically, because you're not opening a warrant, because nothing else will go on, and calling a special town meeting for the Easton Early Elementary School MSBA project funding article only to take place at 7 o'clock on Monday, October 28th, 2019 at the Eaton Sports Complex at Stonehill College. So that's something where we feel that initially our goal, we were trying to anticipate up to 4,000 people to come. If that does happen, then they can fit. Provides opportunity. We're already in touch with off-site parking, busing, things like that to make sure that this is as smooth as a multi-thousand person live voting experience can be.
There's a lot of logistics behind it.
Right.
And, we're going to be looking at things like childcare and, what we can do to make sure that people are able to get to the polls. And it's a lot.
Ensuring public safety.
Is it an evolving plan in regards to parking?
I'm not sure I understand. As
Is
far
there
as
enough
where,
parking at this complex for?
No, we will need to work out additional off-site parking. We're already
Okay.
reaching out to people to make sure that we have those provisions. What we're going to end up having to do. So we kind of had a logistics meeting with public safety, public works, school, and election officials. Stonehill is having a logistical meeting of their own with events, conferences, and events for their own planning. That was one of the first things they said, is that their parking would obviously be a challenge. School will be in session, so we are working to make sure that we have multiple places for parking, with shuttling to the site for people to provide a lot of options. So we'll have our logistics team meet with Stonehill's team, and we'll work that problem and make sure that we have plenty of overflow parking. We're looking at different ways that we can run check-in, because as much as we all want everyone to show up a little bit ahead of time and check in, usually for any town meeting you have 600 people show up in a 15-minute window. In this case, we're looking at 2,000+. That would be very challenging. So we're making sure to really staff up on election workers to check people in. We have a really, really good team that I feel very confident in working on it to try and make it, like I said, as smooth as you can make a multi-thousand person process take. So it will be evolving. Once it's nailed down, we'll put together literature to share with the press and the public, kind of your guide to this town meeting and participating. And I think it's important for anyone watching. It's particularly important for my profession. I'm not advocating one way or another. That's a political decision for the community to make, but I think it's my job to make sure that we're working with everyone to provide as safe and productive of a process as we can. So we're working on it. I feel pretty good about it. And we'll update the board and the public as those details get nailed down. The major milestone is just getting confirmation that we could make use of a facility of this size.
Yeah, and thank you to Stonehill.
Yes, they're a great partner.
Very gracious.
So
So I don't know.
Do you want to make a comment, Chrissy?
I do, I'm sorry. Sorry, I just wanted to point out that when you look at the schools inhabited multi-rooms, one of the challenges that ECAT had shared with us, that the live streaming, there would be a 30-second delay. So just for the public to know that it would be very challenging to have a meeting going on in multi-rooms because of the 30-second delay if somebody were to make a comment.
Well, because you want to allow people, even if they're in the overflow rooms, to ask questions. So
And that's a 30-second delay if everything goes perfectly.
that's right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, these things it's challenging enough. You
Which is
want
a
to
challenge in itself.
you want to rule out variables that could be problematic to a degree.
And, you know, the last time that they did this, I was told that it was in the gym, the auditorium, and the cafeteria, and they lost the feed. And that was well before the open meeting law, like strict policies of participation were involved. So,
I mean, they lost the feed, we delayed the meeting till they got it.
yeah.
I think they were passing notes from one room to the main hall. And it was crazy.
String.
So as awesome as modern technology is, sometimes just getting everyone in one room is better. So that's what I would propose.
It's a great idea.
So if the board is open to that, I would recommend that you vote to call a special town meeting on the date and time listed in your packet, which is Monday, October 28th, 2019 at 7 p.m. in the sports complex at Stonehill College for voters to consider and act upon the necessary appropriation and authorization article for the Easton Early Elementary School MSBA project.
So moved. Second?
Craig and Chuck, all in favor? Unanimous.
It's official.
Thank you.
And
Very welcome. Just one note, Dottie, if I may. So it's not on the board's agenda, but it is tied into this calendar. I'd already alluded to this, but I just think it's important that you have the town meeting. You've now formalized that. The board will, it is planned that we'll bring forward for the board to consider formalizing the debt exclusion election at your meeting on September 23rd. So the October 28th is locked in. November 5th is election day on the calendar. That's what we would propose.
so everyone mark your calendars with those two important dates.
Thank you.
Thank you.